So I thought of giving a small, read out small note of 4 or 5 pages, then throw open the discussion for just sum it up. So little note just as a background of this in terms of availability, access, nutrition, etc. In what situation we are trying to discuss this situation. Now, according to Food and Agriculture Organization, food security means when all people at all times have physical, economic and economic access to sufficient, safe and nutritious food to meet their dietary needs and food preferences for an active and healthy life. With usual definition, all of us go through talk of food security. Now, food security to me it has 3 components: the availability of food, the access to food, and the absorption of food or the nutrition part. The 3 of course are interconnected, as improvement in nutrition is important even to increase productivity of workers, which in turn affects their earnings, capacity and access to food items. So I will briefly discuss the progress of food supply in terms of availability, progress in terms of access to food and nutrition, just to give some kind of perspective to the discussion. As far as the availability is concerned, food security at the national level usually refers mainly to the availability in the country of sufficient food stocks to meet domestic demand either through domestic supply or through imports. So we will first of all look at the performance with regard to availability of food. Attainment of self-sufficiency in food grains at the national level has been country's major achievement in post-independence period. After remaining a food deficit country for about 2 decades after independence, India became largely self-sufficient in food grains production at the macro level, at least in the market sense of the term. Food grain production in the country increased from around 50 million tons in 1950-51 to 259.3 million tons by 2011-12. The growth rate of food grains in these 60 years has been around 2.5% per annum, which is slightly higher than the rate of population growth. However, it must be kept in mind that the entire food production is not available for human consumption, and there are wastages who need it for feed purposes, who need it for seed purposes also, and the net availability in our country is considered to be something like 87.5% of the food produced is generally considered available for human consumption. So as far as per capita availability of food has remained more or less the same during the last 50 years. For example, it was 469 grams per capita per day in 1961. It's roughly the same figure now, it's 463 now. The highest figure of 510 was reached sometime in 1991. Since food grains category includes cereals and pulses, so we may have to differentiate the two. The per capita availability of cereals improved from 400 grams in 1961 to 424 grams per capita per day in 2011. But per capita availability of pulses in fact declined from 69 grams in 61 to 39 grams in 2011. Now, NSS consumption data also suggests that changing consumption patterns have reduced the consumption of cereals marginally in rural areas, but quite considerably in urban areas. This is especially true in respect of rice. All cereals consumption declined from nearly 13.5 kg per capita per month in 2001 to 11.35 kg in 2011 in the rural areas, and from 10.9 kg to 9.37 kg in urban areas. Now, during 1961 and 2011, the per capita availability of fats, which includes vanaspati as well as edible oils, it is increased from 11 grams per capita per day to slightly more than 40 grams per capita per day. Similarly, the availability of sugar has also improved from 13 grams per capita per day to 49.6 grams per capita per day. Thus, the per capita availability of basic foods, that is cereals edible oils and sugar appears to be adequate. Availability of pulses, however, is a matter of concern. So as far as the future demand in the near future, what is likely to be the production and what is likely to be the demand is concerned, as far as future projections of demand for food grains is concerned, most studies except Bhalla and Hazel project demand for food grains in 2020 in the range of 250 to 270 billion tons. Bhalla's study of course projects 374 because of the assumptions made about the growth rate as well as about the requirement of feedstock. The demand projections of the Ministry of Agriculture on food grains is around 250 million tons for 2020. The production of food grains has already crossed that figure. Thus, it appears that there will be enough supply to meet the demand for food grains by 2020. Availability of milk, eggs, meat, fruits, etc. is another component which we call superior foods. However, the availability of milk, eggs and meat is still below the per capita norms fixed by the Indian Council of Medical Research. India is the largest producer of milk in the world, and our per capita availability of milk has significantly improved from something like 176 grams or milliliters per day in 1991 to 290 milliliters presently, which is around the same as the global availability. In fact, that is 289 nowadays. Still, it is below the norm of 300 milliliters per day recommended by the Indian Council of Medical Research. Similarly, the per capita availability of eggs in the country in 2011-12 stood at 55 eggs per annum, while ICMR's guidelines for Indians suggest 180 eggs per capita per annum. The availability of meat is around 4 kgs per annum, which is nearly 40% of what is recommended by the Indian Council of Medical Research. Now, besides, we have per capita availability of fruits at about 60 grams per day and 180 grams of vegetables per day. Thus, we find that while per capita availability of basic foods is sufficient at the moment and is likely to remain so in the near future, yet the superior foods are still in short supply. But we must remember that these are averages only, and averages often hide more than the mean. So as far as the access part is concerned, food security requires not only availability of food, but also access to food. It would require that the people have sufficient means to purchase food. Poor people cannot afford to purchase the food they need at the market price, and therefore subsidization of food and other social protection programs are needed. Adequate purchasing power of the poor to buy food can be ensured in two ways. One, remunerate work to the poor and enhance their power to purchase, and secondly, to increase income through maybe employment guarantee programs and maybe also social protection through PDS, etc. An attempt to discuss access to food must also take into consideration the trend in absolute poverty, because food insecurity has various layers. For example, they are hungry, those who don't have access to 2 square meals a day. Their number, sometimes calculated on the basis of self-perception, figures given in the NSS data, was around, at the moment it's set, it's around 2.5%. And Bengal, of course, come at the top, followed by Odisha and Assam. Then we have, before Tendulkar Committee recommendations, we were told that the poverty was 55% in early 70s and it is 28% 2004 and 5. And by that estimate, there were about 300 million Indians who are poor. But then came Tendulkar Committee's recommendations. This figure, however, was jacked up by using methodology suggested by Tendulkar. The report of the expert group on methodology for estimation of poverty, chaired by S.D. Tendulkar, showed that overall poverty in India was 37.2% in 2004-5, and rural and urban poverty ratios were 41.8 and 25.7% respectively. If we go by this estimate, the number of poor was more than 400 million in 2004-5. Now recently, we have been told by the Planning Commission that they, again using Tendulkar's methodology, that the percentage of poor has come down from 37.2 to slightly less than 22%. 21.8% in 2010-11. This will give us a figure of around 275 million poor. So we are not very sure whether it's 400 million or 275 million or 300 million. Now whether it's 300 million or 400 million, the fact remains that a very large section of country's population needs support to come out of abject poverty, which was derived from consumption figures, because these figures are always derived from consumption figures only. Another feature of poverty in India is that it is getting concentrated in certain regions, such as Odisha, pre-divided Bihar, pre-divided Madhya Pradesh, pre-divided Uttar Pradesh, and also getting concentrated among certain social groups. For example, SCs, STs and Muslims, who suffer from poverty and vulnerability to a greater extent as compared to other castes. Now, one important dimension of access to food in India is intra-household disparity in consumption. It is widely believed that in India, food distribution in the household is not based on need. The breadwinner, who is usually male, gets sufficient food. The children get the next priority. From amongst the children, male children given preferential treatment compared to girls. Thus, in times of scarcity, the dietary intake of women and female children are likely to be the most adversely affected ones. As far as the nutrition part is concerned, apart from the basic issue of access to food, there is also the wider issue of taking care of malnutrition. In fact, access to food at the household level and nutrition are interrelated. As already mentioned, access to food depends on increase in purchasing power due to increase in employment, etc., and social protection programs. On the other hand, factors determining levels of malnutrition are far more complex and varied and those of access to food than those of access to food. While with increases in income and employment, access to food can be improved, but there is no one-to-one correspondence between the increase in income and percentage decline in malnutrition. The general results of studies based on cross-country data show that percentage decline in malnutrition is roughly half the rate at which GNP per capita grows. Now, this relationship incidentally is still weaker as far as India is concerned. For example, while the GDP in India has been growing at a rate of nearly 6 to 7% during the last 20 years, the rate of decline in malnutrition is only 0.5% per annum. Thus, economic growth alone cannot eliminate malnutrition. It appears that this disassociation between GDP growth and changes in the status of malnutrition in India is more to do with the skewed distribution of land and other assets. As far as the role of non-agricultural employment, because some people feel that after all, agriculture employs 55% of popular labor force and contributes only 14% to the GDP, some people have to shift it from here because the average productivity is much less compared to the rest of the sectors. So I'll be skipping out this part, will not be reading out. The only alternative immediately available, which seems to be available to the policymakers, is to promote non-farm activities, because agriculture worker as it is cannot be employed in other sectors. Most of them are illiterate, only 5% of them are higher secondary pass. So in this context, India can learn a lot from China, which during the last 35 years undertook massive diversification programs towards rural non-farm sector, which resulted in rural poverty reduction to less than 3%. Also, the role of the Chinese state has been decisive in building up the physical and social infrastructure, including land forms. If we leave everything to market and growth, we cannot take care of the risk and inequality. Certain redistributive policies will have to be adopted. This also includes social protection measures to address the problem of access to food and malnutrition. PDS perhaps was born out of this understanding, and within the PDS we have already made three categories. There is a category of destitutes, which we sometimes call Antyodaya Anna Yojana, covered under that. Then we have category of BPL and category of above poverty line people. So the total subsidy through the targeted public distribution system is distributed as 18% to the APL category, 46% to the BPL category and 36% to the so-called destitutes. Apart from PDS, we have also been operating other programs related to nutrition such as integrated child development, midday meal program, Manrega, etc., which in my opinion is a watered down version of the right to work. In fact, as per the recently released figures, the faster reduction in poverty it's being claimed is attributed to the success of Manrega and other social protection programs. That coming down from 37 to 22% is largely being attributed to this program. Against this background, the government of India is bringing this food security bill. There are various issues involved. Farmers' lobby has its own apprehensions. They feel that given a large subsidy and the government's general tendency to contain that subsidy, perhaps in future the MSP will either be freezed or will be brought down. So they are sensitive on this issue. Also, there are all kinds of other problems, whether we are going to procure 65 million tons every year required for managing this program. Given the character of FCI and given the leakages, etc., how we are and where we are going to store that grain, how we are going to distribute, whether it's within the administrative competence of the nation or not to manage this program. I would not comment at the moment. There are 6-7 issues which I have in mind, but I would personally like all of you to participate and then we can sum it up. Thank you so much. I will now open this discussion to everybody. Yes.